Welcome to the webinar, Water Well System Components Vital to Water Quality. I'm Cliff Tryans, Director of General Public Outreach for the National Groundwater Association. It is my privilege to introduce our presenter. Dennis Crayon is a water well system professional with Summit Drilling Company Incorporated in Bridgewater, New Jersey. Dennis also has the distinction of being on the Board of Directors for the National Groundwater Association. During the presentation, feel free to type questions in the question box. At the end of Dennis's presentation, he will answer your questions. Also at the end of the presentation, we will make a handout of the presentation available for downloading. This webinar is brought to you by the National Groundwater Association. Without further delay, I'll turn it over to you, Dennis.
Thank you, Cliff. Good morning, everybody. I'm going to do a little housekeeping real quick, if I may. Let you know a little bit about the National Groundwater Association. We are a community of groundwater professionals working together to advance groundwater knowledge and the success of our members through education and outreach, advocacy, cooperation, and information exchange and enhancement of professional practices. Our vision is to be the leading groundwater association advocating the responsible development, management, and use of water. Our goals: the NGWA and its members will use its outstanding scientific and technical leadership, knowledge, and resources to pursue innovation, model best practices, and improve the business climate for the groundwater industry. NGWA will be a credible, valued resource on significant and timely issues that impact the groundwater industry and public access to safe, sustainable groundwater. Our community will grow and benefit from the participation of all groundwater professionals, and through our efforts, the public will be confident that there is a sustainable groundwater resource for domestic, municipal, industrial, ecological, and agricultural uses. Lastly, our values: we believe the whole of NGWA is greater than the sum of its parts. We share a commitment to the informed, responsible, and sustainable use of groundwater. We are a community of professionals who value diverse perspectives and sharing and learning from experience and research. And lastly, we are responsive to our members' needs and interests. And all of that being said, it is important to point out that we are the stewards of groundwater, and we do everything that we can in order to make sure that our groundwater is sustainable and resilient. So we're going to talk a little bit about water well system components that are vital to water quality, your water quality, which is one of the reasons why you have decided to participate in our webinar today. A water well is really a water well system, and a system is components. That's what makes a system exactly what it is. And if you look at the two images that I have here, that is a schematic of a groundwater well, and it is extended above ground surface. That green would be representative of grass, and then you've got the water table below, and then we set the pump below that water table. We don't set it right at the interface where water is, to avoid any type of airlock. So there are a lot of components that go into the well itself and then the delivery of the water into your own home or into a community system. As you can see on the right, this is Robbins Well Drilling. I happen to also be the president of the New Jersey Groundwater Association, and John Robbins of Robbins Well Drilling is the vice president, and he was kind enough to share some of his images. They're out of Chemung, New Jersey, which is the southern half of the state of New Jersey. So a water well system is, again, really a water well system because it consists of numerous components. So again, we have that schematic there on the left of the water well. And then on the right, you can see a list of different components. And there's quite a number of them. I believe that we number somewhere in the neighborhood of 24 in this picture alone. And that gives you an idea of what goes into the bits and pieces that we have to put together in order to make water delivery to your home from the well. And that's everything from the watertight seal to the pitless adapter, pressure switches, T's, water sampling ports. All of these things are very important. If you look, for instance, at number 80 cable guard, that not only protects the cable that powers the pump down the well, but it can also help protect the wire from chafing, along with the torque arrestor, which would be number 5. And we'll look at a little bit more of these components as we go through here. So the following well system components have this much in common. They are designed to protect water from contaminants that are harmful to health or adversely affect the water's appearance, taste, or odor. So whether you're a well owner or you're a well systems operator or you're a well drilling contractor, depending upon your relationship to the water that you're concerned about, whenever you have an issue with appearance, taste, or odor, it's always very important that you get a professional in place to help you out. Oftentimes, we like to think that we're independent and we can do these things on our own, but there may be specific circumstances that can really have an issue that only a professional can handle. It may require up to and including water testing. That image there, it would be, say, for instance, a sample that has been collected and sent to a lab. They can look at the different constituents that might be in that water, everything from solids, turbidity, for instance, the clarity of water, and just how much there is in the way of suspended solids that can really make an impact on your ability to use your water. If you ever notice that there's something going on in your water, you definitely want to, again, contact a professional. We are the folks that know best, and when we might be challenged, then we will also solicit the assistance of a lab. So here's my pals from Robbins Well Drilling here, and they're getting ready to put a well in. And what you see in the image on the right is not only the screen, which is the stainless steel, but you also see the casing as well. And when we speak about screen and casing, they are individual components, and yet they are attached one to the other that make up the portion of the well itself that goes into the ground after we drill the hole. So as the definition is, a tubular structure is placed in the drill hole to maintain the well opening. Now that's what they do primarily in the southern half of New Jersey, as they do around the country, but also in the northern half of New Jersey, as well as in other areas of the country. We oftentimes will have open hole wells which don't require any screen at all, and those are drilled into fractured rock. And so some of the challenges could be a little bit different when it comes to, say, solids that might be in the well, depending upon the fractures that are feeding that particular well. So you want to know, if you're a well owner, exactly what type of well you have in the ground, whether or not it is screened or if it is an open hole drilled directly into consolidated formations. So there's a little bit bigger picture of the operation going on here. The well casing, along with the grout, the casing confines the groundwater to its zone in the ground and prevents contaminants from mixing with the water. So for those of you who might not know exactly what it is that we do, a drill rig like this, this is one of his newer pieces of equipment, he'll drill, say, 100 feet or 200 feet, 300 feet into the ground, and he will, in the South Jersey, he'll be using mud rotary, so he'll be suspending the hole open using a variety of different bentonite clays, and then he can withdraw his tools and then implant the well into the ground. Provided he has done this properly, he will know what the depth of the well is that he has drilled. He's already determined that he has a significant amount of water that will allow that water to infiltrate that screen at the bottom, put that well together, and then put it into the ground. Now, when he does that, it's imperative that we grout around, not the screen. The screen can get well gravel, as we would call it, and that is sized based upon the screen itself, the slot of the screen, be it double odd, 0, number 1, number 2, number 3, depending upon the formation will determine the slot sizes of screens. And I'll get a little bit more into that here in a moment. But when we actually install that well, we need to make sure that there's no surface migration. If you can picture in this image here alone, he installs the well and then he winds up having, say, a fluid leak. The last thing we want to do is have any of the a fluid leak, say a diesel fuel or hydraulic fluid, something like that, migrate from the ground down into your well, because then of course you've got a contaminated well. So just right off the bat to start with, to give you a picture of how it is that we want to make sure that your water, our water that we're drinking, is not contaminated, it starts at the very beginning of the project. We need to make sure that we're showing up with clean equipment with no leaks and that we're not leaking to ground. We also need to confirm ahead of time that where we're getting ready to set up and drill a water well, or even an irrigation well, that we have to make sure that that area is not contaminated. Anyone here that's listening in New Jersey may be familiar that we have the most number of Superfund sites in the country, about 145. So we need to make sure that where we're setting water wells, whether it's for drinking water irrigation, that particular area is free of contamination before we even begin to set a well in the ground, before we begin to drill a well. So the well casing, you're going to see a couple different images here. The most common materials for the casing are going to be carbon steel. You're also going to see plastic, which is most commonly known as PVC, and stainless steel. And we can mix these components, as you can see in the image where the young man is getting ready to put a couple different pieces together. He's going to socket that in so he can thread that screen in to the bell pipe. And there's a variety of different types of threads that we use. You've got bedrock, etc. So it's important that we don't mix and match too much. But when it comes to putting the material in the ground, everything has to have an NSF rating, National Science Foundation rating, to make sure that what we're doing is we're putting in clean, unused material for your water wells. So we have to be aware of what we have in our yard, not only for the well itself, but also what can impact that well. Cliff and I, we discussed this image, but quite frankly, it can be very important. If you were to look out at your yard, for those of you who are dog owners, and you can see the damage that urine can do to the grass, then you can imagine that over time, even carbon steel can wind up being impacted by the acids that are involved when it comes to dog urine. And we know that boys like to pick up around a fire hydrant, which is going to be not dissimilar from a wellhead in your back or front yard, or for your neighbor who may allow their dog to relieve themselves on your lawn, which of course has been a problem since the beginning of time. So always be on the lookout. You may be actually going around your wellhead also using a weed whacker in order to keep the vegetation down. To the degree that I can, I would discourage that because over time, even a weed whacker can wind up impacting the carbon steel and can certainly help in reducing its ability to protect your well. And that image on the right, you'll see this in a couple of different places as well. The potential is not only for corrosion, but also damage from external surface, such as lawnmowers or, more importantly, your edgers. So this is going to be a cutout, what you're looking at here. That's top to bottom. So those red vertical lines, the circles, the ovals, are vertical. And what that's a depiction of is the well in the ground in an upright orientation with the ground around the outside of the casing. And that's designed to protect from surface down to just above the top of your screen. Obviously, you don't want to grout up a screen. It won't allow for the transmission of water to get into your well. But that grout is designed to prevent any contamination from getting from the surface down into your groundwater. So depending upon the location where you might be in the country, there are different types of grout that can be used. And I'm not an expert when it comes to other states beyond New Jersey, but we have a couple of different types of grout that we're allowed to use in order to protect that casing from any transmission of contamination from the surface down to the well. So those of you who are well owners, and if you're concerned about whether or not your well is grouted or if it's grouted sufficiently, you definitely want to check with a local professional. We talk about that some more here toward the Q&A at the very end. So going back to this actual picture here, you not only have bacterial contamination, as it shows there on the left, you can have leakage around your pitless adapter. We're going to cover that in a little bit more detail in here in a minute. That's for your transmission line from the pump, from the well, directly to, say, your home. And we want to make sure that nothing from the surface is getting down into that water table and making its way into your well. So if you look on the right-hand side, lack of a seal at the top of the casing, we're going to look at that a little bit more in detail here in just a minute. And then number two, loose backfill around the annulus of casing. It would be most unfortunate if you did have a well that was installed and not installed properly where grouting was not sufficiently put in. And there is always that potential. So when we do see that there is contamination in a well, anything from E. coli to localized contamination from an industrial site, let's say, the potential exists that there is an issue with the grout. And there's also potential that can exist that the water has seeped in a mile or two away into the groundwater, and you're eventually going to be pulling it toward your well by using your pump. Something like that was very similar 25 years ago here in New Jersey in the Township of Independence. A coaxial manufacturer had leaked trichloroethylene into the groundwater on the other side of the mountain adjacent to Independence, and we had to go in and abandon 300 wells because there was nothing else that we could do for them other than abandon those wells and then put city water in place. Very unfortunate. but that can happen. And it had nothing to do with the grout around the wells. It had more to do with the groundwater table being affected by a local manufacturer. So here's another image. If your casing is sufficiently corroded, or if it breaks, or if the grouting fails, and contaminants can enter the well and compromise our well quality. And that could be anything from just at the very beginning you saw images of cloudy water. It could be cloudy. You can wind up with the infiltration of sands and sediment getting into your well below grade, particularly in the within the confines of the water table. But also, again, as I mentioned, the migration from surface, E. coli and the like, which can make its way down into your well. Nitrates, pesticides. If you're using things like Roundup and not to disparage a company, but any one of the pesticides or lawn use products that people use in order to maintain a nicer lawn, you definitely want to keep that away from your well also because of the potential for migration. So grouting, here's a little bit closer up where you can see fills the space between the outside of the drilled borehole and the casing to provide water from trickling down into the well. And that can occur at any pathway along, as you're looking at this image, anywhere from ground surface by the pitless adapter, any corrosion that may be occurring within your pipe, your steel, your carbon steel. It's unlikely that you're going to see damage either to PVC plastic or stainless in particular once it's down in the water table, but there's always the occasion for biofouling and the like, which can also impact your water quality. So the well cap, now what you can see as a well owner, it's very important that you take a look at this and that you make sure that you have the right type of sanitary cap on there. These two images show a non-sanitary versus a sanitary cap seal, and we'll look at this a little bit closer. We're going to flip this over here in the next slide or two. The well cap is what actually goes on top of the casing, and it should be bolted or locked so it cannot be easily removed. If you are missing bolts, I would encourage you to get in contact with your local licensed professional, have them come out, have them do an inspection. The bolts should not just come up missing. They should be of a quality that would last as long as what we like to call sanitary. We call them bonnets here in New Jersey. That might be a familiar term in other areas of the country. But you definitely need to make sure that this is something that can be secured to your wellhead. And I'll show you a couple of images as to why that's a good idea. So when we look at this picture, I'm going to go back a slide real quick. The picture on the right is the sanitary seal cap, and where that red arrow is pointing at the bolt, but you can see that little extension on the top, and now you can see it from the underside. What you have there are a couple of vents. As it says there, a vented screen so that the pressure difference between the inside and outside of the well casing may be equalized when water is being pumped. You don't want to airlock your well. So with those screens, it's also very important that those are intact. I have to share this story. When I was a little kid, I took a sip out of a little water fountain that my father had hooked up to the spigot on the side of the house. And the first thing I got out of that little a water fountain was a spider. So spiders have an innate quality of getting where we really don't want them. And I ate that spider, so I got to skip lunch that day. But the reality is that you not only can have spiders that can be making their way into these vents, but also a variety of different bees and other little creatures that can get in there, and they can have an impact on your well. So you definitely do not want to allow any outside influence to impact that well bonnet, that sanitary seal, and make sure that those screens are in place. That last hole that you're looking at, for those of you who are unfamiliar, say this is a 6-inch bonnet, and for a 6-inch well, that would be the diameter of the well. You're looking at that little threaded hole. That's usually going to be a 1-inch hole, and that's going to carry the conduit, the cable that will actually power your pump. And then that gets, a piece of pipe gets threaded in there in order to protect your wiring, which would then lead outside down into the ground and then travel to your home, to your power source. And that's what will power your pump. So you also want to make sure that that is also protected. And I'll show you an image of busted pipe, that which has come free from the sanitary well seal. So a quick review. We're now about 20-25 minutes into this. Well casing is one of the following: the process of conducting a visual inspection of the well system, the well pipe that brings water to the house, a tubular structure that is placed in the drilled well to maintain the well opening? B and C, or none of the above? Now, I know the answer, and I hope that some of you do. We did cover that. The answer is C. It's a tubular structure that's placed in the drilled well to maintain a well opening. Question number 2. A failure of the well casing practically never happens because it takes too long for steel to corrode and plastic never corrodes. And that would be a true or false. And that answer is false. Depending upon area conditions, steel well casing can corrode. While plastic does not corrode, it is not as strong as steel and therefore could break if used appropriately for local conditions. We also had a report just a couple of weeks ago that a well was struck by lightning and that the PVC had actually been damaged due to the lightning strike. We don't yet know the full extent of the damage to the well, but stranger things have happened, and that's very unfortunate. So going back, though, right after that word false, depending upon area conditions, if you're living in a very wet area, for instance, then there's always the greater likelihood that there could be puddling around the base of your well at ground surface that can eventually damage carbon steel. And I have an image of that, and something that we definitely want to keep an eye out for. We want to be able to mound soil around our wells to make sure that we're not going to have that happen. Question number 3, the purpose of grouting a well is to seal the well cap. That is typically above grade, so that would not be a good answer. Improve the appearance of the well's connections. They're not particularly aesthetically pleasing. I know folks put all kinds of things around their well, and I'm really going to talk about that. Provide a watertight seal in the space between the outside of the drilled hole and the well casing. All of the above or none of the above. The purpose of grouting a well is to provide a watertight seal in the space between the outside of the drill hole and the well casing, and that would be the entire length of the casing from grade on down to above the screen. So we're going to look at a couple of different images of some of the sanitary seals, or what may not be so sanitary. A cracked or loose well cap could allow outside contaminants, including bacteria via insects or vermin, into the well. And we have both an image of a spider as well as some vermin, little mice. They're not very good swimmers, and if they get in there, they're not likely to last very long. However, you don't want them in your well. And then, of course, that looks like a caterpillar in that lowest image on the right of the sanitary well seal. Well owners should visually inspect the well cap from time to time and contact the water well system professional if any problem is detected. If you see anything that might be considered abnormal, I would definitely encourage you to contact your local contractor. The material around this well that you're looking at here, for instance, the ground surface, may not necessarily be ideal, as it appears to be some fairly loosely arranged fill, and you would prefer not to have something like that, because that only allows for the opportunity for greater influence of any groundwater or any ground influence of contamination getting down towards your well. Got a couple more images here. In particular, that one in the bottom right. Most regulations that govern the installation of water wells would include making sure that the well is extended at least 1 foot or more, depending on where you are, above the 100-year floodplain. So in other words, if for any reason you're in an area that is subject to any type of flooding, or has been over the last 100 years, then your wellhead shall extend at least 1 foot or more, depending upon local regulations, to ensure that if you do have water that does collect around that wellhead, that you do everything that you can to prevent that flooded water from reaching that screen that I showed you earlier in the sanitary seal, and then making its way into your well by migrating through that screen. A very dangerous proposition. So again, I would strongly encourage, take a look at your wellhead, make sure that you don't have water ponding after a good rain. We had a really good soaking here in New Jersey yesterday. In some areas, they got as much as 5 inches, which is an excellent opportunity for people to go out and have a look at their wells to see whether or not it's being influenced. That upper right, you can see that the conduit, the pipe that is used in order to carry the electric from the sanitary well head to the home, has been disconnected. And that is also not permissible. You want to make sure, because right now what you have is that opportunity, that unthreaded pipe is now leaving a 1-inch hole for any type of vermin or insect to make its way directly into your well. Not to mention the fact that they can also walk right into your home as they get through the top of that pipe and follow the the electrical line directly, the conduit, into your home. You don't want to have that either. In the bottom left, you can see that somebody thought it'd be maybe a little bit of a good idea to attempt to cover some of the wellhead with a little bit of plastic, but clearly that bonnet, that sanitary seal, is not affixed appropriately or properly to the top of that well. Both the transmission pipe to conduit for the electric is not going to be connected any more than the bonnet itself is connected to that well, allowing any number of things to be getting into that well. Very unfortunate for the homeowner. Here we've got a couple more images. What you're looking at there in the upper center is a sanitary seal, and it's missing a port. That's going to be a little threaded plug that would go in there, usually a 3/8 or a 1/2 inch plug, and you do not want to have any of those ports with an opening, so definitely make sure of that. In the bottom left, you can see that that rock is holding a cap in place. That rock looks, or not the rock, but the lid itself is more similar to what you would find for an environmental or observation monitoring well. It's a slip over cap like that. What's not in the image is likely to be on the back side, is there should be tabs that would allow you to put a padlock there. But again, this is not the type of sanitary seal that you would expect to find on a water well, but rather something that you would expect to find on an environmental well. But nonetheless, rocks are not designed to hold your cap in place. And then on the right-hand side, you can clearly see that the line for the electric is not connected to the seal on that well. And you've got a little bit of extra vegetation around. Not a big deal so long as it's not overgrown. One of the things that we don't have an image of, and I did drive around a little bit over the weekend, but I was unable to spot one, is make sure that you don't have any trees or shrubbery that's actually, and people will do this, people will plant the vegetation around their wellhead, not realizing that the roots of these plants, in particular trees, can have an impact. Trees have been known to break sidewalks, and sidewalks are made of concrete. So I have no reason to believe that a tree, should it decide to, can break through a grout that could be in the ground that's adjacent to your well, to your casing. So you always want to make sure that the surrounding area of your wellhead is free and clear of any vegetation. Okay, pitless adapter. This is installed, and I'll give you another opportunity to see exactly where it is. This is installed below grade, below your frost line, and it's designed to provide a watertight seal between your well casing, the side of your well casing, and your distribution line or transmission line, that which will distribute the water from the pump to that pipe. You can see the threaded end there, and that actually allows us to service the pump as well. It will provide us the opportunity to put a piece of threaded pipe in there and then lift the pump out of the ground that's attached to either to draw pipe or to PVC. So when we're using this, this is affixed both to the inside and the outside of your well casing, again, below the freeze line. As a rule, we don't see too many failures with this. You can see that there's a rubber gasket, and that's designed to be held on the inside and the outside of that casing when it is installed. And that, again, allows for the transmission of the water to go through, preventing any solids, say, for instance, soils, to be getting between the gaskets and then into your well. Now, keep in mind, this is going to be not in a grouted area. We don't want to grout these in because there's always the potential for having to remove them. And again, this is going to be found usually, give or take, depending on where you are in the country. Here in New Jersey, we're usually around the 30 to 36 inch frost line, depending upon which county we're drilling in. So we want to make sure, though, that these things are put in the right place and are used effectively. And as a rule, we don't see too many failures. So very helpful. It was a really big thing for us. And what it did was it allowed the removal of putting pits in people's yards and then having to dig them up. If you can imagine, and I had to do this, I go back to the Township of Independence, a lot of those wells, I had to dig by hand, find the well pits in order to access those wells and abandon them. And this removes that possibility, and that allows for that pipe to be sticking up out of the ground and allows us easy access in order to service your well. So this is a cutout of where you find the actual pitless there in the ground, and again, below the freezing line, below the frost line. The connector installed underground below the frost line provides that sanitary seal between the well casing and the water line running to the house. And so this is a basic cutout of what it would look like. What's important to point out in this, because I really dig the schematic, and so you can see that the ground is mounded at the very top, directly below the sanitary well cover, and then that will help to prevent collection of rainwater from sitting around that well and eventually making its way into your grout and potentially damaging that. Okay. And then you can see the cement grout on the right-hand side. You see at the very bottom you've got screen, then your submersible pump in there, and then directly above that your cement grout. And then if you follow that cement grout, it does cut off at the or below the pitless that allows us to access that. And that's going to be then carrying your discharge line in a trench from the well to your home. If the seal is compromised, it could allow bacteria or other contamination into the well, and that's when we would come in to determine whether or not a pitless adapter is contributing to such water quality problems. That's going to be something more akin to one of the last things that we would want to have to dig up if we can avoid that because of the cost of doing that. We would want to eliminate other things before going straight to, say, something like pitless because of the cost in getting that looked at. We would go after other remedies first, potential remedies. So the bottom of many wells is another well system component we call the well screen. The well screen prevents excess sediment from entering the well. And what you're looking at is a little bit of sand that somebody put on some stainless steel screen. That's going to be wire wrap. And looking at this from this image, this is not a picture that I took, but this is going to be probably as much as a 30 or a 40 slot. And that is the dimension of the slot width. If you look at that screen has slots that are cut into it or manufactured into it. And depending upon that width, that's in millimeters. And that's how we determine if it's going to be 10 slot, 20, 30, 40, etc. And we use the sediment that's in the area, the material that we're actually drilling into, is sieve analysis, which allows us to determine what would be the best screen in order to put in the ground so that we don't have infiltration of finer material getting into your screen when we shouldn't be allowing that. And then we're going to put well gravel around that, which helps to filter out some of the fines that might still be mixed in with some of your heavier grains that we're sizing your well up against, your screen against. So the well screen attaches to the bottom of the casing, allowing the water to move right on through it and keeping most of the gravel and sand out. There's always a likelihood you're going to get some of the fines in there, but we like to keep that as limited as possible. And again, we go back to the slot size of the screen after a sieve analysis of the material that we're drilling into to determine what would be the best millimeter diameter cut that would allow migration of water, but not all the sand and fines also accompany that and get into your water system. Okay, so different types of screen include a perforated pipe, continuous slot, and slotted pipe. I did add an additional image beyond the perforated here. The upper center picture, that's going to be some of your wire wrap PVC. That's going to be a little bit stronger in the way it's manufactured, wire bound. And then the bottom right-hand picture, that's going to be, and those screen, not all of your slots are going to be in a horizontal orientation, but most are. It's a little bit more rare that you would see the vertical that you see in that red circle, the oval there on the right-hand side. It's not completely uncommon, but most oftentimes the screen will be in that horizontal plane. And again, that allows for transmissivity of the water to get into your well and hold back all of the fines and sands that would otherwise make their way in with that water. So we got some more questions. A tight-fitting well cap is recommended to help ensure the contamination does not enter the well from the top of the well casing, and that's true or false. And the answer is false. What is recommended is a bolted or locked well cap. Just something that sits on top of your well is not sufficient. A tight-fitting well cap, not bolted or locked, is not sufficient because it can become undone by any number of different circumstances. A pitless adapter is a device to prevent the pitting or corrosion of metal surfaces in water well systems. Now, your pitless adapters are typically brass, but they're not designed to prevent pitting or corrosion. They are the hookup between the, say, for instance, a carbon steel or PVC with a watertight seal that prevents any corrosion, contamination from migrating from your surface down into that well. And is always installed below the frost line, as the answer says. A well screen is attached to the bottom of the well to prevent excess gravel, sand, and sediment from entering the well. Another true or false, and that answer is true. But there are a number of wells, and I've installed a bunch of them here in the state of New Jersey, both not only for water wells, but environmental as well, where it can be an open hole well that allows water to come straight in from fractures. But we develop it sufficiently enough so that the fractures have been cleared of any of their sand and gravel that would not then transmit its way into the water system. So maintaining your well system and these important components can protect your drinking water quality and your health, which is clearly evident. Something like when we talk about health, there's always the potential, and you want to check with your local water authorities or your professionals that are in the area concerning not only the potential for man-made contaminants, but also naturally occurring. We have here in the state of New Jersey naturally occurring boron and radon. We've got arsenic and magnesium. And there could be a host of those contaminants in your areas as well that may require some additional components in order to protect your water quality and then, of course, subsequently your health. So remember, maintaining your well system and these important components can protect your drinking water quality and your health. Have a groundwater systems professional periodically inspect. How often? Well, I have to leave it up to the individual. However, we do have recommendations here in the state of New Jersey that they do it at least biannually. One of the more ambiguous terms. What we mean by that is to get it done at least twice a year, up to and including getting your water tested as well. But it's very important, if all you're doing is going out and cutting your grass, is to have a look and make sure that your sanitary seal is on properly and you're not looking at any corrosion or contamination around the wellhead. So you're welcome to visit wellowner.org to find out more useful well owner tools, including a private well owner hotline, the well owner tip sheet, well owner lessons. We've got a bunch of them on there that you can review after this, and more free live and recorded webinars. What's also important, if I may, is you'll also have an opportunity to find NGWA licensed professional contractors in your area through wellowner.org. So I'm going to see John this evening. That's the guy on the stand. He's a master driller here in the great state of New Jersey, again, the VP of the New Jersey Groundwater Association. And I'm going to discourage him from allowing the homeowner, the gentleman there on the left, to approach the equipment without being protected safely. Very important that we make sure that we protect the public when we're drilling, as well as what we leave behind when we're done. So don't forget to check wellowner.org for some other online lessons. If you've got questions similar to these, what should you need to test your water for? Do you need to be looking for boron or radon? There are a number of different contaminants. Again, a lot of them naturally occurring that you may not be familiar with. How should I maintain my well? What do I need to do? What do I want to keep away? How can I help keep my water safe? What should I do if my well floods? And it does happen. It's in a very unfortunate circumstance, but at a minimum, you want to contact your local professional for them to come out, take a look at it, make sure that it's in good shape, and also have your water well tested, especially if you did have some flooding occur. How do I get water treatment? There are a number of local professionals. I'm sure that would be happy to help you out there. And what you should know about getting a new well. There are cost benefit calculators that you can get in touch with, as well as your professionals that are local to you. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. I'd like to thank you all for joining the webinar. We've got a few minutes. Timing turned out to be pretty good. And if we have any questions, be happy to entertain them now. Cliff?
Yeah, we do have questions, and also before I share those, the handout of this presentation is in the handout box. So if you viewers, if you look at that little panel, there should be a place that says handouts, and if you click that little arrow on the left, you will be able to click on and download a PDF of the presentation. So, I have a question. Someone wants to know, it says, I've noticed after heavy periods of rain, my water sometimes gets cloudy. Could it be that one of the seals in my well system has failed?
Possible, but unlikely. And any seal that may have failed, there's only two that might be impacted after a heavy rain. And those seals would either be the pitless adapter itself, again, located below the frost line, not grouted in place, Or if your wellhead had been submerged from heavy rain, then there's a possibility that whatever puddling had occurred had managed to migrate its way from those vents that I showed you earlier and then down into the well. I would definitely consider I would contact a local professional and have them come out and get some samples of your water and get it tested to see what might be making up that cloudiness.
Okay, thank you. Here's another question. Do all wells have grout around the well casing? How can I tell if my well is grouted? And if it's not grouted, can anything be done?
Well, that's significant in the potential for some problems to occur. Not every state, which is unfortunate, has rules regarding the installation of groundwater wells, regardless of the reason it's being used. A neighboring state to New Jersey has no rules, has no state law as to how wells are to be installed. In New Jersey, we're pretty heavy on the regulation side. We're getting ready to readopt a rule here in the very near future. So all wells should definitely have grout around the casing, and the grout itself should be selected based upon local conditions. There are a number of different, as I mentioned earlier, different grouts that can be used depending upon the type of material you're drilling into. How can you tell if your well is grouted? That's almost an impossibility since everything that has to do with the well is below grade. And let's say you've recently purchased a home and you don't have any information regarding the well. With any luck, and I suspect that, that there's a very good possibility, if the well was not installed too long ago, then your state, DEP, DEC, may have a record in place on file for your well that would speak directly to the construction of that well, and you should be able to get your hands on that. Now, there's no guarantee that what is put on paper is what has also occurred, but most oftentimes that would be the case, and the driller of record will have recorded that they grouted the well from X point to X point, with your screen or open hole being located at 75 feet or 100 feet or 200 feet, etc. So hopefully all that information would be available to you through your state departments. And if it's not grouted, can anything be done? That's a tough one. We're going through an enforcement issue here in the state of New Jersey. It is a matter of public record where a number of boreholes were put in for geothermal system that were not grouted properly, and they're having to remediate that. So if it's going to be a water well, the only way you'll know for sure if it was grouted is really by personal knowledge. But if you are concerned, then that would require the abandoning of that well and then having to replace with new. That would really be your only recourse in order to ensure that you do not have any contamination in the future of your water system.
All right, thank you. Here's a related question. I've seen some wells with a concrete pad around the casing. Is that recommended?
I would say no if you've got a pitless, because that's only going to thwart your water professional from getting to it. However, as I mentioned in Independence, we had a number of concrete pads that I had to break in order to access the well underground. But if you have a well pad around your well that is extended above grade, again, that can thwart your water professional in order to get to that pitless to remove your seal if you needed to, say from the outside, because you can only get to the well from the inside, but in order to replace that pitless if you needed to. I would not encourage a homeowner to put a concrete pad in there. I hope that answers that question.
Okay, thanks. Here's another question. I've noticed some sand or grit in my water at times. Does that mean my well screen is going bad?
Depending upon the amount, not necessarily so. Especially, let's say, if I go on vacation for a week or two and I'm not running my pump, I shut down my electric, let's say, then any suspended solids that may be in my well would eventually migrate into and then fall toward the bottom. And then when I start my pump back up, then I will be stirring up that sediment and pulling that in. If it's not affecting your water quality to the degree that if you run it for a couple of minutes and it clears right up. It wouldn't be cause for concern too much, but if it's a regularly happening occurrence, I would definitely consult one of your local professionals to have a look, and also go through the process of lab analysis to make sure that it is only sand or sediment and not any type of biofouling that may require some remediation of your well. So really, it would depend upon what is creating that issue. As a rule, screens themselves don't go bad, but they can be clogged. They can suffer a number of circumstances depending upon your aquifer and the condition of your aquifer or what might be in there. So again, I would encourage consulting a local professional.
Okay, here's another question about suspended solids. It says, can suspended clay be removed with a filter, or should the well be abandoned?
Can suspended clay be removed? I trust that when we're talking about suspended clay, we're not talking about the remaining or the residual clay that was used in the process of drilling, because that would definitely be something that could be developed out. If you've got clay sediment that is building up in your well and it continually migrates into your well, then that can be an issue with the condition of the aquifer, the selection of the screen that was put in, as well as the filtering media, your well gravel that was put in there. So, but putting in a filtration system, I can't really answer that. It would depend upon the size of the solids and how much we're talking about. So that I would definitely have to defer to a local. If my first two options didn't already answer your question, I would get in touch with a local professional on that as well.
Yeah, the questioner said it is in fact clay in the aquifer. So you're saying that probably a sample would need to be taken, and then a water treatment professional could determine what technology might be appropriate for that.
Correct. Yeah. And here is, as they say, the rub. Whenever we're dealing with an aquifer that does have suspended clay solids like this individual is bringing up, we always want to know that in advance and do everything that we can in the process of selecting not only the screen slot, but then also the filtering media around it in order to hold those suspended solids at bay, whether it's clay or otherwise.
Okay, thanks. Here's someone says, I've noticed a small depression about a foot from the wellhead. Is this an indication of a problem? It is about 8 inches deep by 8 inches wide.
Wow. I'm going to say yes. I'm going to say that clearly that's indicative of a problem. And I think it's important, anyone who's been watching the news over the last couple of days has seen a sinkhole that has developed and that continues to develop and has swallowed homes. Now, I do not know specifically where this well is, but if it's an area that is subject to sinkholes, or in the unlikely event that a cavitation may have occurred in the process of drilling that well, there's always the potential for undermining some of the surface area that that as a driller we don't necessarily see when it's all said and done. And it could take some time for a depression to expose itself. Now, depending upon exactly where it is, if it's an 8 inch by 8 inch, and if the driller did not necessarily use their cribbing or dunnage for their outrigger, let's say if that's about 3 feet from the wellhead or 4 feet from the wellhead, I'll say close to about 3.5 feet, that could be a depression from their outrigger that they may have lifted using a shovel and it settled back in. But really, any depression around that well, I would take very seriously, and I would definitely have a professional come out and look at that and have them make an assessment as to what is caused or is causing that, regardless of whether or not it's getting bigger. Any depression around your wellhead, you definitely want to address.
Okay, thanks. Here's a question. I have a bolted well cap. Should I tighten it periodically or check how secure it is in some way?
It wouldn't hurt that if you're going by with your lawnmower on Sunday that you just give it a quick eyeball and maybe just give it a touch. Make sure that it's not loose to pull off. as a rule, not as an exception, you're working with bolts that are nylon locking, so they're going to have a nylon ring on those bolts, and we should be replacing those as water well professionals. And that way they don't just come free on their own through vibration or otherwise, allowing those bolts to free up. So I strongly encourage the use of nylon locking nuts on your bolts. But yeah, it wouldn't hurt to just every now and then, as you walk by it, is to check to make sure that it's secure. You definitely don't want anything getting in there.
Okay, thank you. Here's a question. Wouldn't it take a very long time for steel casing to deteriorate? My well is fairly new. Do I have anything to worry about?
How many dogs do you have? Going back to that image. Local conditions can have an impact if what is fairly new versus environmental conditions. And I'm not a chemist. I'm not familiar with, say, for instance, some of the chemicals can be used on lawn improvement, and whether or not they can have any impact at all on carbon steel. That would be something for someone with a degree other than what I could speak to. But it wouldn't hurt. Again, visual inspection is always important. If you do notice any type of pitting, and keep your pets away from it. Cats will do the same thing, especially if you've got feral cats. You may not know that they're coming around and doing the exact same thing that any dog would. So I would certainly be on the lookout for, even though it might be new, any attention that your well is getting from the local animal.
Okay, thank you. Here's one about screens. I see in your presentation that there are different types of screens. Which is the best type to use? And I guess I would add on to that, or I would add on the question, is the type of screen correlate with the size of what you're filtering, or could all those types be used for all different sizes of screening?
Well, different screens work differently in different formations. They all have their applications. So different types of screens, what's the best type to use would determine where you are, what you're using it for, the type of formation you're in. Depth can also have an impact. I'll give you an idea, for instance. When installing PVC in the ground, and if you're going to, not if you're going to be, it'll have to be grouted up. If you use a Schedule 40 screen, then that would have to be grouted no more than 100 foot, give or take, per day. That allows the grout to cure in place. And for those of you who are familiar, that when grout cures, it generates heat. And for a novice, what can wind up happening is it will shrink the PVC in your well, making it incredibly difficult to install or remove a pump if you manage to get it in there before the grouting occurred. So environmental conditions can have an impact, and sometimes local regulations can determine whether or not you're permitted to use one type of well screen or another. Did that answer all of that, Cliff? I'm not sure.
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
You may have addressed this in your presentation, but I'll ask the question anyway. How would you know if the pitless adapter was in bad shape if it's buried? Does the soil need to be excavated to inspect it?
Yes. And I did mention it in the presentation. I would usually reserve that to be one of the last things to do in order to address any type of contamination. It's possible, but they're designed, they're pretty hardy pieces or components of our well system. So again, that would be one of my last recourses to investigate. And then of course, having to dig down and uncover your transmission line, your water line from the wellhead to the home. It can be labor intensive, but it's always possible. So if you've managed to address any other reason that might or could be causing any type of contamination in your well, then that's certainly something that would have to be addressed. It would have to be looked at. And one of the things that a contractor can do, a licensed professional can do, when they come out, if they decided to and they needed to pull your pump, they can inspect the seal on the pitless from the inside to determine whether or not you have environmental conditions that might actually be impacting the gasket, the seal, from the inside to the outside. So that at that juncture, that might be an opportunity to have a look as well. I hope that answers the question.
But this is not, the excavation of dirt is not something that a well owner should attempt to do, I take it?
No, I would discourage a well owner really from doing anything to their well because of the potential for doing more damage. I'll give you an example. Even if they're going to be hand digging down to their pitless, once they reach their pitless, what are they going to be able to do? They wouldn't be able to pull the pump, or at least suspend the pump, allowing them to remove the pitless to inspect the gasket seal. And even if they were able to rig it to where they could, they would then have to get a new pitless available and in place in order to reinstall. So no, I would certainly discourage a homeowner or a well owner from doing that on their own. A number of things can go wrong with the installation. So up to and including if you strike your distribution pipe, even with something a shovel, then ultimately you're going to be the responsible party that would have to replace that transmission line, and that would be your water line, say from the well to the house. And if you could avoid doing that, I would do that as well.
Okay. I have a question. It's not exactly related to well components, but I'll go ahead and throw it out there to you anyway. The well owner says, my home just sold and the buyer wants a volume and a quality test. Any risks?
That last part, was there any risks?
Yeah, and I'm assuming he means to, well, I'm not sure if he means risks to the well or risks to the sale or something like that, but is that a standard, is that not an uncommon request in a transaction to have a test like that, a volume test and a quality test?
A volume test, I think, would be a little bit of a head scratcher. But even that, you would be able to get that, provided, of course, your local DEP or DEC, your state or health department should have that information available, or certainly you hope. But volume, that'd be a bit of a head scratcher. Quality is not an uncommon phenomenon at all. In fact, here in the state of New Jersey, you shall have your water tested prior to the sale of a home. That has to be disclosed that you've got quality water. Otherwise, the new homeowner would be in for purchasing a new well without knowing it. And that would just be a matter of full disclosure. Volume, on the other hand, I think, again, that's, at least, I'm not a realtor, so that's kind of sort of new to me. I've never installed a well where I didn't have the capacity for the home. It's against the law here. But let's say if I was only getting a half a gallon a minute and that the well owner of the property required more than that, but that's all I can possibly get him based upon the fractures in the rock, then storage systems would be put in place in order to accommodate the lack of flow or the lack of volume, if you will. So yeah, I think the volume question is a bit of an odd one.
Hey, we got about 1 minute left. The questioner had a clarification. He's talking about risks to the recharging. He says risk to the recharging of the well water.
Well, that becomes a different question and a great question. If he's ever run out of water before, then yeah, then of course there might be a risk. But most localities or most regulations will say you shall have X amount of water based upon peak capacity, or peak demand rather. So if I have 2.5 baths and I've got a washer and a dryer and I've got a swimming pool and I got this and I got that, peak demand will determine just how much water I require and nothing more beyond that. So any risk to the individual of running his well dry, that would depend upon the formation. There's always a possibility of that, up to including drought conditions this year in any particular quadrant of the country. You can suffer that event where you would run your well dry. Now, will it recharge? I would like to think so, and certainly would expect that it would. But that would be as individual to the well as it is to the aquifer, as it is to the components that are put in. The pump itself, now, if you're going to run wide open on every outlet that you have in the house for 20 minutes, or I don't know what kind of volume test this individual might be looking for and how long it would take to run his well dry, I think that would be considered a little outside the box. That sounds, from my perspective, a little unreasonable. It's not something I'm familiar with here in New Jersey. Quality, yes. Volume, no.
Okay. Well, we have run to the end of our time, so I want to thank you, Dennis, very much for your excellent presentation. I want to thank all the viewers who participated in this webinar. As I mentioned, there's the handout that you can download. Also, we will be archiving this webinar on our website, wellowner.org. So if you want to get that link in a day or so when it's posted on wellowner.org, you can share that or view it again or share it with somebody else if you want to. So with that, we want to bring it to a close and just thank everyone for being a part of this today.
Thanks, everybody. Have a safe day.